Well, hey, good morning again. I'm Dion, and I'm excited to share with you the final message in this series. First, I want to ask you a question. How do you feel about movies on airplanes? Think it's a good thing? Bad thing? I remember one time sitting next to a guy who was streaming a Blues hockey game right next to me with no headphones, just full on his speakers. So in that moment, it was not good. But anyone, I mean, a lot of you, I'm looking around the room, a lot of you grew up in the generation where our idea of in-flight entertainment was the Sky Mall magazine in the seat back pocket. You know what I'm talking about? There's cool stuff in there. That was it. And that's what you had to look forward to. Ooh, Sky Mall, what's going to be in there? Now you have all of these options when you get on an airplane, whether it's on your own device or video screens in the back of seats. So a couple of years ago, I was on a really long flight, 4 hours or so, and I was scrolling through the movies, and I saw a movie called The Biggest Little Farm, The Biggest Little Farm. It's a documentary, and it looked kind of interesting, and I like documentaries, and I figured I'd get way less judgment watching that from the guy sitting next to me than if I watched The Notebook again. So I started watching the documentary, and has anyone else seen this movie? Yeah, it's really, really cool. And I don't get any promotional credit or payment for this, although if someone knows how to get me that, we can talk about that. I'd love to know. But no, it's a really, really neat movie. It follows the story of this couple. Their name is John and Molly Chester. She's a chef, he's a documentary filmmaker. And their dream is to buy a farm. They buy this old, blighted lemon farm in Southern California. And this farm has been over-farmed, industrial farming for decades. And so it looks like this. It's dead. Nothing is growing there anymore. The soil is dead. But they buy this farm with the hope that they can make it a living, sustainable farm again. And the documentary tracks their 8-year journey, 8 years of trying to turn this into a place of life again. Now, you can watch the documentary for yourself, but I just want to give you a glimpse of what happens over 8 years of work as they try to transform this into something else. So just take a look at this briefly.
Started with a promise that we'd leave the big city and build a life in perfect harmony with nature, like a traditional farm from the past.
Here we are, Apricot Lane Farms.
Molly and John are very happy about this. What do you think of this, Todd?
This is what we're fighting.
Our version of a farm would be different. Plants, wildlife, livestock, all working together.
Here they are, Emma the pig and Mr. Greasy the rooster. Friends for life.
We wanted to believe that everything had a purpose. We had our plan. And nature had hers.
This feels overwhelming.
But even the pests have a role to play. And these are the opportunities that fuel our farm. They told us we were crazy. And sometimes they were right.
Breaking news in California. The rest of it, you have to go watch the documentary. But it's amazing. I mean, I showed you those pictures before. This is what it looks like now. Just an incredible transformation. And the way they did it is through a method called biodiverse farming or regenerative agriculture. I can't even say it. But what that basically means is looking at a farm, and this is how people did it for hundreds of years, looking at a farm as a system, as an ecosystem. The Chesters, they had a mentor who helped them figure this out. And he said, you know what? After a length of time, it could be 7, 8, 10 years, here's what's going to happen. If you do this well, if you do the work in the right way, then here's what's going to happen. You'll create this ecosystem that can sustain itself. The farm will begin to help you do the work. And so over the course of the documentary, they're fighting all the different things that farmers might fight. There's a moment where snails come in and they're covering all of the trees and they're killing off the trees and devouring the fruit. And they're like, well, what are we going to do? We can't use pesticides or poisons because that wouldn't be good. That'd get us back to where we were before. And so they realize, oh, we can bring ducks. So they bring all these ducks onto the farm, and the ducks go off and just pick off the snails, because apparently ducks like snails. But then that creates another problem, because then the ducks go to this pond that they have for irrigation, and the ducks do what ducks do in ponds, and suddenly it's like sludge, and they're like, now what do we do? And they go, oh, we could put some, bottom feeder fish and things in the pond, and they do that. And then there are gophers that come in and they start digging into the soil and killing the roots of the trees, and that's not good if you're trying to run a farm. And so they're like, what do we do about these gophers? And they say, oh, let's get owls, because owls eat gophers, and they build owl houses. And then things really start to get interesting, because coyotes come in, and the coyotes are running off with their chickens, and so they have to get big dogs to keep the coyotes away. But then here's what happens. Those hungry coyotes who can no longer get to the chickens develop a taste for gopher meat. And so not only are the owls going after the gophers, but the coyotes are dealing with the gopher problem, and suddenly the farm, the life that's on the farm, begins to sustain itself. See, what I like most about this documentary, some of you are already tired of me talking about it, but one of the things that I loved about this documentary is it spoke to me about things that are bigger than farming. It spoke to me about the way most of us approach life. See, for most of us, we go through life and we encounter a problem and we go, okay, how am I going to solve this problem? What's the quickest, cheapest, most expedient way for me to solve this problem? And then we come across another problem, and we solve that problem, and another problem, and we solve that problem after problem after problem. That's the way we tend to go through life, piece by piece. And this is what I call disintegrated living, where life is a bunch of disparate fragments and different problems that require different, unique solutions. And so we're running around trying to solve the problems, trying to fix all of this stuff. And sometimes in fixing one problem, you end up creating a bunch of other problems, right? You know how this goes. So what intrigued me about this documentary is not just the farming implications. What intrigued me is when John the farmer, he said this. He said, the solutions to our problems began to appear within the diversity that we had created. Stay with that for a second. Think about this. The solutions to our problems, apply this to your life. The solutions to our problems began to appear within the diversity that we had created. What if this could be true not only for farming, but what if this could be true for all of life? I mean, wouldn't that be amazing if you could live life in such a way that the work that you did, what you cultivated, what you created as you went through life, created a diversity and ecosystem where the next time you were facing a big problem, the solution just appeared. Wouldn't that be awesome? I'll tell you, it would have been awesome on Monday afternoon when Jocelyn went into the laundry room and she was like, there's water all over the floor. I'm like, so much for Labor Day. Right? Wouldn't that be awesome if the problems the solutions to the problems rather just appeared? And you see, this is what this entire series has actually been about around the corner, investing in your neighborhood. We've been talking about lofty things like vocation and the great commandments of Jesus. What we haven't done probably as well so far, and today's the day for it, is to acknowledge why all of this work might be worth it. The natural human question, what's in it for me? We heard 2 weeks ago that obligation is not enough. Obedience is not enough for most of us. We don't operate that way. We learned that God's shoulds are toxic without God's whys, and I love that. I think that's so true. So today, let's get into it. Here's what's in it for you to take all the things we've talked about in this series of investing in the neighborhood where God has placed you. I want to talk about what's in it for you. What's in it for you when you love your neighbor and you love God? What's in it for you when you pull down the castle walls and you lower the drawbridge over the moat and you start to engage in the lives of the people living around you? What's in it for you when you put first things first, or you get out and you take a walk like we did last week and you just pray what you see and you ask God for new vision? What's in it for you? Well, then you're doing life just like the Chesters did farming. You are proactively building a diverse ecosystem that will help you solve life's next big problem. See, there's an untapped potential in our neighborhoods, or if maybe you don't live in a neighborhood as such, in our communities, there's an untapped potential When you invest your energy in what's right around the corner, here's what you're doing. You're cultivating an ecosystem. That's not just about you serving others, but you're creating something that will eventually, inevitably serve you well. And this is the genius of God's plan. From the beginning of societies and people groups. Let me just show you this. Leviticus 19. Leviticus is a book that is very confusing. There's a lot of, some of the instruction makes sense, some of it seems really, really weird. And yet what Leviticus is God giving his people a plan for how to do the thing I've just talked about. I want you to look at these verses with me. I'm gonna just read through them quickly. Don't get caught up in all of the individual things, although maybe God has something for you in one of these individual verses. But I want you to step back and I want you to think about the big picture that these commands are meant to create. If a people live this way, what would the society look like? That's what I want you to think about. So when you reap the harvest of your land, God says, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings, the leftovers of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen out of the baskets. Instead, leave them for the poor and the foreigner. For I am Yahweh, that's God's personal name. When you see Lord in all caps, it's God's personal name there. For I am Yahweh, your God. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight, right? Pay people when it's due. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Don't take advantage of people, especially those who are differently abled, but fear your God, for I am Yahweh. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great or the rich, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life, for I am Yahweh. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. When you have to rebuke your neighbor, do it frankly so you will not share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but here it is, first time in Scripture, but love your neighbor as yourself, for I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. Lots in there, but can you step back and see the big picture? Can you imagine if we took this seriously, if we started to live this way? See, what God was saying to his Old Testament people, and this is the point of Leviticus, God is saying to his Old Testament people, you know what, you're living in the middle of this dry, barren world, a cruel, harsh world. But if you can live differently, instead of being in it for you, what's in your best interest or the best interest of your family, if you can live differently in the way that I will show you, here's what's gonna happen. If you can serve and love one another in these ways, not only will it be good for your neighbor, but it will be good for you. You will be an oasis of life in the middle of a barren world. You will be a blessing not only to yourselves, your people will prosper, but you will prosper everyone around you. Now this is ancient. I'm going to fast forward in the Bible all the way to the book of Romans, and I want you to see, again, I'm going to read this quickly, and maybe God has a word for you in this. I want you to get the big picture, and I want you to see the continuity from Leviticus 19 all the way to Romans 12. 1,000 plus years later, these are the words of Paul. He says, love must be sincere, so hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual passion, your fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Again, you remember some of the Leviticus stuff about gleaning and leaving stuff behind? Bless those who persecute you. Don't get angry with them. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, high position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, don't finish him, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. See, God's plan has never changed for his people. And again, if you step back and you think not just about all the to-dos and all the shoulds, but you think about the big picture and you say, what would it be like if people chose to live this way? I think the answer is pretty simple. It would create this life-giving ecosystem that would be a really nice place to live. Now, does this take a lot of work? Yeah. But is the work worth it? You tell me, where would you rather live? Right, there's a clear choice in front of us. But what keeps us from making the clear and obvious choice is often that our vision is small and it's short-sighted, and we go through life hastily making these decisions that seem like they're in the best interest of us in the moment. And what that leads to is the last couple hundred years of industrial farming, short-term gains that are at our long-term expense. Where the soil dies, where it's no longer fruitful. Think about society now. Think about how disconnected we've become from each other. And suddenly, because of that, life is no longer sustainable. It's hard, it's difficult. We're putting all this time and energy into trying to make life work, and it just doesn't seem to work very well, and we're exhausted and we're worn out because God has a wiser plan for us, and we've been ignoring it. See, instead of a short-term, small, hasty vision, if we can do this with a bigger vision, a longer timeline, it's still work, but it's better. Now, I just want you to know that I am as guilty of doing it the hasty, short-sighted way as anyone. It's like at one point in life, I knew this. I knew this early on in life, and I was an ambassador, I was a champion of this, but then I had about a decade's worth of forgetting on this whole truth. We moved to St. Louis on January 1st, 2009. I'm like, what year is it? Yeah, 2009, January 1st. And if you remember that time of the timeline, that was during the Great Recession, and we were coming from Michigan, and the housing market had been decimated. We couldn't sell our place. We found a renter for it, so we couldn't buy a place when we came here. It wasn't even an option for us. So instead, we found God provided an amazing rental house that was way nicer than anything we could afford, but God did a whole deal, and it was pretty awesome. So we were renting a house in this neighborhood, and we fell in love with the neighborhood. And it wasn't just the architecture or the big trees or the nice houses. What really made us fall in love with the neighborhood was the people, the neighbors. We moved into this neighborhood, and immediately, it's a small neighborhood, 14 houses on a double cul-de-sac street, kind of dead ends. 14 houses, and in this neighborhood, there were already a bunch of young families raising kids that were identical ages with our kids. We're like, man, this is awesome. Our kids get to grow up with kids their age. In fact, one of my son Corbin, one of his best friends is a little girl who was born 6 weeks after him, and they've been friends since birth, and they still are today. And we lived next to, in our rental house, this couple who was a little bit older than us, and they're the really handy couple of the neighborhood. They've got a beautiful yard. They've got all the yard tools. We didn't even have a lawnmower. And so they were just like, no problem, just come over and borrow our lawnmower. And so we did. We borrowed their lawnmower. I don't even think I even paid for gas. They just were like, it's fine, just go ahead. Anything you need, it's yours, take it. In this neighborhood, there was a man who used to stand on the sidewalk, and he was a combination of a one-man neighborhood watch and Walmart greeter. Like he just all day stood outside with his dog, and he'd wave at everyone coming in and out of the neighborhood, kind of watching, knew everything going on in the neighborhood, but also was this smiling presence. We loved our neighborhood. 10 months went on, and we were able to sell our place in Michigan, and it came time for us to start looking for a house to buy, and our lease was coming up on this rental house, and the family who had left it was coming back into the country, long story. But so we started going around looking at houses, and every time we'd go out with a realtor looking at houses, we'd see some great houses. But Jocelyn and I, we'd drive back home, and we'd turn onto our street, and we'd both be like, oh, we love it here. This feels like home. We love it here. When are we ever going to find something like this? Well, as God would provide, before we ended our lease or bought another house, a guy 2 doors down put his house on the market. Been a single guy for a long time. The house was built in 1985. He had not done a thing to it. I mean, it was just original form. And so we were like, this could be a great opportunity. And so we bought the house 2 doors down, which was the best move ever. And literally, I mean that, the best move ever. We didn't have to get a moving truck. We carried boxes down, 2 doors down, from one house to the other. It was like ants at a picnic kind of thing. We were just like carrying stuff over. It was awesome. But it was the best move ever because we got to stay in a part of this amazing, amazing neighborhood. But then something happened. This forgetting. Maybe it was because the kids started to grow up, and as kids do, they took to different interests, and so they played together less in the neighborhood and were off at all the activities in different directions. I know some of it was that people moved out of the neighborhood, families divorced and separated, and that changed everything. New people moved in, and at some point, here's what happened. At some point, it just felt like too much work. Too much work to keep reinvesting, cultivating new relationships, getting to know the neighbors, hosting barbecues in the cul-de-sac. And we started, life got busy and it was all these problems, and we just started to recede inside. And for a while that seemed like the smarter thing to do. It seemed smarter to invest in other things or try to make life work because we were overwhelmed. But I realize now that was short-sighted of us. And the proof is that on Monday afternoon, when the washer had broken and flooded all over the floor, I don't have anyone to go like, hey, come over and help me. Or when we go on vacation, we don't have anyone to say, hey, can you come over and watch the dog for us? Or can you come and mow the lawn? And so we got to find someone and we got to pay someone and to mow the lawn. Otherwise, when we come home, you know how it is in Missouri, it rains twice. And I'm like, Corbin, here's the machete, do your best. It's a jungle out there. Right, that's the proof that this pulling away of ceasing to invest, it has not served us well. It actually has made life harder, more complicated. We thought we were saving ourselves something, but we actually made more work for ourselves in the long run. And I think this is what we all do, right? We all tend to do this. There's a miscalculation we make when we do what's expedient for the moment over what is beneficial for the long haul, what will serve us and others in the long run. And this is true all over our country. This is what's breaking America, right? Doing what's expedient in the moment over what will serve us and others well in the long run. This is what's happening in our churches. There is a short-sightedness. And as a result of it, we are all getting robbed out of a richer way of living. But from Leviticus all the way to Romans, God has been showing us a better way. So what does it take to help your neighborhood, your church, your community get there? Well, I'm glad you asked. We've been talking about it all throughout the series, and if you're new today, you can catch up online on all these messages. Today, I want to give you one final plan. It comes from Luke chapter 10. We've been in Luke 10 the entire series, but we've not looked at the first 4 verses. And today we get to. After this, Jesus, the Lord, appointed 72 other disciples. He has his 12, he has 72, and he sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. And he told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go! I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. Do not take a purse or bag or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. So Jesus is about to send 72 people out to do some important work, to cultivate, to invest, and he gives them this plan. Look at the key words of this plan. The plan is kind of a weird plan. The plan is, I'm going to send you out 2 by 2. He says, go. He says, the harvest is plentiful. He says, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to be like lambs among wolves. And then he gives not a packing list, but an anti-packing list, a list of things that you're not supposed to take. Doesn't tell them what to take, but says, don't take this stuff. It's a weird plan. And yet maybe in this plan, Jesus was speaking to the 72. Maybe he's even speaking to us about how we can begin to live life differently, how we can begin to engage our neighborhoods and find purpose just right around the corner by living as good neighbors. Maybe by two, when he says that, he's just simply saying, hey, no one goes alone. Don't try to go alone. If you're gonna set out to do a new work of life in your neighborhood, don't try to do it solo. Find someone else, someone in your household, someone in your family. Maybe it's another neighbor. Maybe there's another neighbor who you can go to and say, you know what, let's do something in this neighborhood. Let's make this a place of life and community and connection. And I want you to team up with me, just like we're about to do in Prosper the City. You're gonna hear about that. I want you to team up with me and let's do this together. Jesus is letting us know that we're not meant to do these things alone. But here's what I'll also say, that if you find yourself alone and no one wants to help you, don't forget that your greatest partner always is Jesus himself, that he's with you. Jesus says in Luke 10, I'm gonna send you out to all the places I'm about to go. I'm gonna follow you. The reality is for us, it's the opposite. Everywhere Jesus tells us to go, he's already there. He's already prepared the way. He's gone ahead of us. We're never alone. Go, he says, go. Maybe that means for us, you've got an assignment. You know, we think about our neighborhoods as places that we've chosen because the property values were good, or we like the amenities, or maybe it was the only place we could afford. It's the only stuff that was available on the market. Maybe our neighborhood is a rental situation, and we're like, I mean, that's all I can do. I can't buy a house. Instead of seeing it as this, choices or inevitabilities or lots of options or few options, maybe we could start to see the place that we're living as a place God planted us, as a placement, as an assignment. Instead of looking around and saying, I mean, how did I end up here? Maybe we could believe that God intends for us to be here, that he's put us in those neighborhoods for a reason, and we've got an assignment, so get at it. Why? Because the harvest is plentiful. This is just a reminder that good things are waiting for you, that we don't have to do all this work on our own, that God is already at work. There's already a harvest there, and there are good things waiting for you. Expect the good. As you set out to invest in people and relationships, you're gonna find hard things, you're also gonna find good things. Maybe it's a little less like farming and more like a treasure hunt. The treasure's there, he says. You just got to get after it. And then he says this. He says, I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. That seems a little unwise or unloving, but I think what Jesus is saying is embrace the vulnerability. It's true, he says. You're lambs and you're going out into a world that's risky. There are wolves out there. It's not going to be safe for you all the time. But instead of staying home locked away, or instead of upping your game to become more wolf-like, Jesus says, hey, just embrace the vulnerability. It's true. You're lambs and the world is full of wolves. That's okay. How can that be okay? Well, for starters, the good shepherd goes with you. You know Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down. You know that one? This means that even as you're amongst wolves, you've got Jesus, the good shepherd, and he's with you, and he's leading you, and he's defending you, and he's providing for you, and he's encouraging you. That's why you can go out as lambs among wolves. Not only that, though, not only do you have the good shepherd, through Jesus' own life, he shows us what it's like to be a lamb among wolves. For he was the Lamb of God, and he surrendered himself over to the agenda of wolves. And after they tore him to pieces, after they had their way with him, remember at the end of the day, who won? The Lamb won. And so the lamb who was slain ended up being the lamb who took away the sin of the world. There's nothing wrong with being a lamb among wolves. In fact, even when the wolves do their worst, God will do his best. And at the end of the day, his agenda will win. So yeah, is it risky? Is it scary? Is it vulnerable to get out in your neighborhood and start to talk to people and know people? And is it messy? Absolutely, absolutely. I will never tell you otherwise. But it's okay, Jesus says, embrace the vulnerability. And then finally, do not take. And that long packing list of what not to take, maybe this is just a reminder that God equips the called. That's part of an old saying. The saying goes, God does not call the equipped. It means that God doesn't look around the planet for someone who's got all the right financial resources and all of the right knowledge and all the right abilities and all the right gear. And he goes, oh, here's somebody who's got all the right stuff. I want you to do a job for me. Sometimes he does. What we see more often than not in the scriptures is God calls somebody who goes, there are better qualified people for this, God. What are you thinking? And he says, no, it's okay, because I'm a God who doesn't just call the equipped, I'm a God who equips the called. When I've called you to do something, when I've invited you to do something, you may not have what it takes, but don't sit around and wait until you're fully equipped. Instead, I will equip you on the way. That's what it means to walk by faith. I don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the plans, but I know who's with me. I know who's called me. I know what he sent me to do. And I'm trusting that on the way as I go, even though I am not equipped, that because he loves me, because he's with me, he will equip me. Now again, this seems like a crazy plan, doesn't it? Seems like a lot of work. And yet, if we're willing to take God at his instruction and the bigger picture of what he wants for us as people, then the reality is we get to turn dry and dead, lifeless soil into an oasis of life again. We get to be a part of that. And then when this happens, not only is this a really nice place to live, not only will this work transform your neighborhood and the community you're part of and our churches? But when this happens, eternities will also change. Remember, some of you know this, one time Jesus told a story. And he said, the work of God in this world is like a farmer who went out and he scattered seed. And some of that seed fell on the hard, packed down path. There was no way that seed was getting in. The birds came and they took the seed away. It never had a chance to take root. Some of that seed fell amongst the thorns and the weeds, and it grew up, but then it got choked out. Some of that seed fell among the rocks, and it sprung up, but it didn't have any roots. And so when trouble and hardship came, it withered away. Makes me wonder, and all this talk about how the gospel's losing influence in our culture, certainly not the gospel that has failed. It makes me wonder, is part of the problem that we, the workers, have bucked our calling to get out there and work the soil, starting right around the corner? Because then Jesus says, but this farmer, he threw some seed, and that seed landed on good soil, and that grew into a powerful plant that yielded a harvest 100-fold. You see? Like John and Molly Chester and what they did on that farm, God is inviting you, and maybe it'll take the next 8 years of your life too, to get at it, to cultivate good soil in our neighborhoods, in our communities, because the work is worth it. For life today and life forever, the work is worth it for you and everyone around you. So let's go. Pray with me. God in heaven, I just recognize that in the beginning you intended for us to be in a garden. And in our short-sightedness, we traded that away for the difficulties and the hardships that we live in now. But I'm grateful that you're a God who invites us first to have hope that we can be in a garden again. And then you invite us to be a part of that work in transforming our world, at least a little bit, until Jesus comes back. So God, I pray that you would forgive us for our short-sightedness. God, we confess that although your plans for us as a people are clear and they're repeated in Scripture, we've ignored your Scriptures, we've ignored your plans, we've thought ourselves wiser. God, forgive us. For our arrogance, forgive us. For our foolishness, God, forgive us. God, we also ask that you would come and rescue us. Rescue us from the wastelands that we have unwisely constructed for ourselves. And God, show us how to begin to live differently, to move through the world differently, to cultivate communities, neighborhoods, churches, a society where there's life, and that life works together, not at odds, but that life works together to serve the good of all. God, I pray before we leave this series that you would burden each and every one of us with a renewed burden for the people who live right next door to us and right around the corner, that we would not be so caught up in living that we forget the people that you've placed right around us, and that we'd feel burdened, we'd feel called to serve them, but we'd also feel encouraged that as we do, we're creating something that we get to live in that's really beautiful and life-giving for us too. God, there's a lot to undo in us, but I pray that you would, and I pray you'd give us a bigger vision today. In the name of Jesus, amen.
I'm so glad you were with us this week here at Pathfinder Church. I pray that God did speak something important and meaningful to you today. And I want to just give you permission. Feel free to share whatever that is that God shared with you. That could be by clicking the share link below. It could even be by just having an in-person conversation over lunch or coffee with someone that's important to you and letting them know how God is moving in your life and what next step he's encouraging you to take. And on that note, if you are new with us and looking to take a next step, we've got a lot of resources in the links below, things that might be helpful for you on your spiritual journey, wherever you are on it. And you're also invited to sign up for our Message podcast, where you can hear years worth of content that we've been putting out that have been helping people as they take a next step on their journey towards wholeness on the path that God would have for them. So check all of those things out, but I pray at this time that you just have a great rest of your week. May God be powerful and mighty for you.